this is your first time tuning into the Major Music Lounge podcast, we like to have discussions like this with music creators, no matter if you're a music producer, an artist, and we've had stories from creators that have had like publishing deals. So if they have like music in the film and television space, or maybe they've produced for a major artist. In addition to that, we've had like music production, app developers, sound designers, and also content creators, not only that are producers, but also artists as well. You know, if you create YouTube content in the lab, maybe at your shows, events, whatever that may be, and you're pretty consistent with it as far as your content that has helped you build a following, not only on YouTube, but on social media. That's a conversation we love to have, and you can actually hit me up on any one of my platforms at d._major music. That's going to be on Instagram if you use Threads, and also TikTok. On Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it, is actually going to be something a little bit different. It's d.mme, but you can hit me up on any one of those social platforms, and let me know if you're interested in being on a podcast, and we'll see about making that happen. Interview. One of the things that I've been doing is actually just kind of talking about some of the topics that have been on my mind. And one of those topics is, I've been seeing DJ Payne go back and forth with a lot of artists on X and Twitter about purchasing beats, or better yet, them having to buy beats. And what I did a previous episode about that, and I've been doing episodes on that for over a decade. You can go back to like the Producer's Corner podcast that I used to do with Icebreaker Radio. We did a whole, I think it was an hour-long show on that one topic that caused a lot of I think it was actually Johnny Giuliano, and that was around 2010, maybe even. But he had some issue with similarly an artist on social media, talking about that they don't need to pay for beats. And it's just an asinine statement for some of these artists to say they don't have to pay for beats. Why don't you have to pay for beats? We have to pay for all of the shit that you see here in the studio to create the beats. We have to pay in some cases for some of the expansions or sounds that come in these sound packs to create the beats. And the producer is actually a part songwriter on these projects. So regardless, like, you may not get a big return on a release, but you're paying a producer to have access to the beat. And guess what? After that, you still have to give the producer their percentages whenever you release the song on all streaming platforms. Now, maybe you're a new up and coming artist that this might be your first release, and you never know. That song might end up, putting you on a map as an artist. And if that's the case, then if that producer hears that's their beat on that song, and they see it's getting some buzz, you can best believe that you're going to be hearing from somebody's attorney at some point if they're not getting their percentages. So you're going to, whether you purchase that beat as a lease or as an exclusive, you still have to give that producer their percentages. The only thing the exclusive license grants you is that the producer cannot sell the beat to another artist. But, big picture, at the end of the day, yeah, artists should definitely have to buy beats. I mean, I know a lot of producers, myself, I have leases for $25. And some of you guys can, go out to the club on the weekends, or, you go and you buy your bag of weed, but you don't put that into purchasing instrumentals to get a project done. And, at, let's just say $25 a pop, you spend $100, and in a lot of cases, some producers even um have sales for artists to, get beats at a discounted price, or bundling, a certain amount of beats together. Um, and still there's a lot of artists that don't take advantage of those. And that could be steps towards building or working towards completing an album. Now, a lot of times what happens is some of these artists don't even make the producer an offer that is reasonable for both sides to work together. Instead, they move to, oh, well, I'm going to let you make money on the back end, when they haven't themselves proven that they can even get enough streams to generate $5. How is that producer? I used to know, for example, um, and I'm not going to put the name out there, but I knew this one individual who at one time, this was like 10, 15 years ago, but had a label going, and they were assigning these artists to their label, and they were coming out with these albums while the person who was signing these artists to this label was investing in a distribution, and he was pretty much banking on these artists getting sales or streams to get his return on his investment. And he did that for a lot of artists out there. And, for a minute, he was doing pretty well. But at the end of the day, he wasn't getting any type of return on his investment. And, it ended up being something that went under. Well, you have to really get a lot of streams, or, even if you did it, you'd probably have a better chance actually doing it as a DIY project. But, that would still be better than trying to obtain, as many streams to make up. Let's just say, for example, you have a 10-track project and at $25 a pop. So that's, let's just say, $250 that should be going to a producer. But you know how many streams it would take to, I can't even, because I don't have a chart in front of me, but I can't figure that out. So, that's the type of things you have to think about. Now for a major artist, yeah, you might want to go all in and give that artist those beats for that project for free, because you know that you're going to get that return on the investment. So, artists that want these instrumentals for free, but can't generate enough streams to get their return. Not many producers are gonna accept that deal. It's okay as a producer to find you a couple of people to work with, but outside of that, most producers, they probably still work 9 to 5s, and selling beats online is something that they want to do at some point full time. And you can't sacrifice, purchasing all of this gear, all of these sounds, all of this equipment and investing. You can't afford to give stuff away for free and expect to survive that way. So, yeah, at the end of the day, I do think artists, and I've always thought that artists should invest in themselves. Um, and, another thing is producers are going to work harder for artists that spend money for them. And any artist, I know if I give an artist something free, which is rarely, but in the event of that happening, it's like I said, under a situation where we've already talked about it, and I'm going to give you 100% effort. But if it's somebody that I don't know, and you just want something free just to, mess around with, and you ain't serious about it, nah, that ain't happening. So that's my little tangent about artists having to purchase beats. Now, transitioning into another segment, this is something that I kind of been wanting to discuss for quite some time. And some people might get offended. If you feel like I'm talking about you, then maybe I am. But one of the things that doing a podcast that I'm sure other podcasters could relate to is whenever you reach out to a creator or whatever type of podcast you do, you reach out to someone that you want to be a guest on the podcast, or maybe that person even reaches out to you to be on the podcast. And maybe, I know like myself and anybody that has been on my podcast can tell you that that's pretty much how things work, which is we talk about a date, we talk about a time, and once we both agree up on a date and time, I'm gonna go ahead and send you the invite, whether that's a week, whether that's 2 weeks, however long. Whatever we talk about, I'm going to create the invite and I'm going to send it to you. Usually a day or two in advance before the episode, I usually reach out to that individual to confirm that they are going to be on the episode, on such and such a date. That individual usually says, yes, I'm going to be there. A lot of times they are, but there's a few times here and there where they say, yes, they are, and they don't actually show up. Now, a first impression is everything, meaning there are some artists, some music producers out there, they can hit me up anytime and say, or ask me rather, what do you have open? Hey, I got this coming out in such and such a date. I wanted to make sure that, I get the word out on it. I look up my dates, I shoot it to them. We agree, they show up. Those type of guests know they can always hit me up and I'm gonna get them on. But if you the type of guest, I had one individual, again, not gonna give any names out about who or in fact there was a lot of people, but this is one particular instance, and this happened, I want to say late 2023, maybe early 2024. But I had a producer who we tried to set up 4 times, and each of those times I did exactly as I described. We had talked about a date and we came up with a time to do the interview. And when that date came around, the first time didn't show up. Second time didn't show up. And me usually I'll give you 2 times. Maybe the first time an emergency happened and for whatever reason you couldn't show up. That is totally understandable. Maybe the second time around, well, if there is a second time around, I just ask that you hit me up to let me know if there is something going on. Because I set up, I get ready to go. I spend time doing a little research, maybe listening to that music creators work, whatever they have on streaming platforms. If they have videos on YouTube, I like to also check out their social media to see what they have going on. When I have a guest on a Major Music Lounge podcast, I don't just say, I'm picking this random artist or that random artist. I actually go and I take a look at everything that this artist is doing. That way I make sure that I put in the work as a podcaster to learn about my guests, and I am informed about the things that they are doing. That way when they come on the podcast, that creator and myself can have a meaningful conversation and understand where each other is coming from. So it's not just like somebody comes on and on the fly, I'm thinking of all these questions that I'm going to ask. No, while I'm doing the research on this artist, I'm actually coming up with some of those questions that I want to ask on a podcast. And in addition to that, I may build some more questions around some of the responses that I get from that creator. So Some podcasters, they might operate that way where they just have somebody on, they don't do any research about that artist or that producer, and maybe they find a way to have some meaningful conversation. But I feel like, from my experience doing this as long as I have, I started this podcast in 2021, and over that whole time, I'm a fan of a lot of other like podcasters. I listen to a lot of like NBA podcasts, a lot of NFL podcasts. I listen to a lot of even like professional wrestling podcasts. Like shout out to Chris Van Vliet. But I take things that I hear, a lot of these other podcasters say in terms of how they prepare for guests that come onto their platform. And it's helped me grow and become a better podcaster myself. So, if I'm investing my time to learn about you, I think like, and I got another thing like from work, not the job that I work currently, but there was this job I used to work, and they used to say that you should prepare for as long as like you're going to be presenting. So I kind of took that into um the podcast and how I prepare. The podcast is usually about 30 minutes. We may go a little bit longer than that, depending on the guest that comes on. I've had some people I've had on for 45 minutes to an hour, but that's usually where we're kind of uncovering layers, and we're having a lot of deep discussion about some of the things that they're doing. So I say that to say I'm investing time into learning about my guests, and the least that the guests could do is show up on the podcast and also take advantage of a platform where they can come on and talk about what they do, and in a way where you can present it to your followers to, really understand you from a different perspective. Because you know what, a lot of artists, I know some artists even that I've let on the podcast, that they hardly post anything to their Instagram. But, I don't know how, as a creator in 2024, you can truly make it off of not posting any of your content to your Instagram, but yet calling yourself a creator in some way, shape, or form, and expect to really build a following and gain some fans and, other people that you could network with in the music creators community. But a podcast is a way that you could, talk about maybe how you created your latest project, or, if you're a content creator, why do you create some of the content that you create? Things like that. I'm just coming up with, some things that I like to talk about with other creators that come on my podcast. And, from my perspective, it's helped me gain other creators that have wanted to get on the Major Music Lounge podcast. I talked about it on previous episodes, how, one producer or artist might appear on the show, and guess who they're followed by? Other producers and other artists, not just other people that want to be fans. But same thing with myself. There's been several individuals that have came on the Major Music Lounge podcast, and somebody out there sees them that follows me on my podcast and hears their interview, and next thing you know, they might be working on new music together, or they may appear on someone else's podcast that has been on my show. So this can work several different ways. And even like there was an artist by the name of King Shamps. Shout out to King Shamps, but he came on to my podcast in April of 2024, and he talked about how he uses podcasts and platforms like this to promote his music. And sometimes, in some cases, these podcasts, they might not get a ton of views, or maybe in some cases they do. And, whatever the situation may be, they're still able to tell their story to their following. And on top of that, to some of the new eyes that are, getting put on them from, people watching the podcast. Just like I said earlier, you never know who's watching, who might say, "Oh, this brother sounds interesting," or "This artist sounds interesting. I might check out his music on, Apple Music or Spotify. I might check out his video on YouTube." And they might gain one fan. They might gain 10 fans off of that one episode. Or, that again might go to them, as far as their following, getting a chance to see them in a different light. And same thing might happen is a person who, they might be a friend and never listened to your music before might decide they want to listen to your music. So this can work in several different ways. And don't sleep on these independent platforms just because it's not the biggest hip hop blog on the internet or whatever the case may be. You never know what could happen 6 months to a year from now. A podcast that hadn't quite blown up yet could possibly blow up, and people go searching for older episodes. And again, that episode could be yours. So I always say, don't burn the bridges with these creators. Don't stand up anyone that you've agreed to appear on their podcast um, with, because we put a lot of time and a lot of research into what we do, to bring these episodes to you each and every week. And don't take it for granted because, I wanted to create this platform in 2021 because I didn't see many other platforms like it to where people stop me, sometimes and tell me that they as well don't see many other platforms like this where artists can just come on, talk about music, talk about the art of creating, talk about their journey in creating music, some of their experience, getting some of the opportunities that they get. So, this is not to put anybody down or nothing, but, I usually give that artist or that creator two times and then I move on to the next because for that one artist that misses an episode on purpose or, maybe something comes up, whatever the case may be, I could have had someone else on that would have shown up. So, make sure, again, you continue to support these independent, whether it's a podcast, it could be somebody that actually writes articles about creators on their website, but show up for them. It helps their platforms grow and it creates opportunities for other creators to get on and, keep these platforms alive as well. So, that's all I really wanted to say about that and the whole beat selling thing, or should artists buy beats online. I didn't want to make this a long, drawn out episode, but I did want to come on to just kind of talk about some things that have been on my mind as of late. It's actually kind of fun doing these solo episodes and whatever, topics that are on my mind at that point in time. And I'm going to continue to do these as often as I can. If you as listeners have any ideas on any solo episodes or any questions, a I may start doing a Q&A episode if I can get enough questions for the Major Music Lounge podcast. Maybe if it's something even like answering 1 to 2 questions on the podcast per week. But we get a whole lot more questions. I may just do a whole Q&A episode. So we'll kind of see how that goes and whether or not we'll venture off into that space. But if you're interested in it, please leave a question here on YouTube, or if you follow me on Instagram, feel free to DM me on Instagram at d._major music, or on Twitter X at d.mme. I appreciate y'all tuning in to another solo edition of the Major Music Lounge podcast. It's your host D Dot, and until next time, stay safe, and I'm out.
Major Music.